Happy Wednesday! I'm glad you decided to join me for some comprehension this morning, or afternoon, or evening, or maybe it's not even Wednesday. I don't know. It's the beauty of online learning. So grab your booklet and a pencil and find a place where you can focus, and we'll get started. Okay, grade 4. This is my third take. Australia and America's capital cities. So as we read, we're going to picture how the capital cities are alike and different. Okay, so you're picturing using your visualization strategy. Visualization, how are they alike and how are they different? So try to picture them in your mind. Australia's capital city is Canberra. Canberra is the location of Australia's Parliament House and High Court. The Parliament House is shaped like a boomerang, while the High Court overlooks a nearby lake. So think about a Parliament House shaped like a boomerang. Okay, and that might give you some idea of what it looks like. These buildings are similar in purpose to the U.S. Capitol and the Supreme Court building in, the U.S. Nation's Capital. This is a U.S. resource, guys, sorry. Washington, D.C. In these buildings, people make and settle laws for their country. Canberra is also home to the National Library of Australia. It is very similar to the Library of Congress. Both are huge libraries with millions of books. The National Library of Australia has a copy of every book made in Australia. The Library of Congress has a copy of every book made in the U.S. The two buildings even look similar, with many columns and windows, even though the Library of Congress has a large domed tower and is much older. Both cities also have many monuments for people to see. These monuments teach about the history of the country. For example, Canberra has the foundation stone, which represents Australia's 6 original colonies. In Washington, the Lincoln Monument honors their 16th president. Okay, so what words from the passage helped you to picture what the different buildings look like? Let's go through and just find some. So they're similar in purpose. This talks a lot about purpose. They're similar to the library. So they're huge libraries. Huge is an important word. So huge. Because you can imagine that it's a big building when you hear the word huge, with millions of books. The National Library of Australia has a copy of every book ever made in Australia. The Library of Congress. The two buildings look similar with many columns and windows. Okay? The Library of Congress has a large domed tower. So columns. So columns are like in Greek buildings. They're kind of these, I don't know if you can see my drawing here. So columns are kind of like poles, fancy poles that hold up the roof of the building. So you'll often see columns in old Greek ruins. The columns are still standing for a lot of them. Okay, and so this is a column. It's this part that holds it up. So huge. They have windows and columns. Oh, only one L, Mrs. Oaks. C-O-L-U-M-N-S. So they have windows, columns, and then the Library of Congress has a domed tower. And a dome is like half of a circle. So a dome is kind of like a big half of a sphere. Domed tower. Okay, and then I'm looking here. These buildings are similar in purpose. This one is shaped like a boomerang. That's pretty cool. U.S. Capitol overlooks a nearby lake. These buildings are circle. Okay, just making sure I haven't missed anything. Looks like a boomerang. And if you've ever seen a boomerang, it's that thing that you can throw, and it kind of looks like this. So you throw it. Someone brought my kids back one from Australia. You throw it, it's kind of like a curved stick, and it's supposed to come back to you. And then monuments. So monuments, you can imagine pretty things that people would come to look at. A monument is like a statue or some kind of a special object to commemorate something important that happened or a person that was important. Okay, so any words that helped you, you can write them down here. So I'm going to do my drawing of columns here. Columns. And I'm going to, at the end of this video, I'm going to put some pictures up on my computer to show you, because it's kind of hard to see with my pictures, but sometimes visualizing helps us to understand what we're reading, because we're drawing a picture in our mind, right? So columns, maybe it has a domed tower, a boomerang, so maybe those shapes can help you picture it in your mind. Okay, let's move on to the multiple choice questions, and then I will find some pictures of these buildings to see how your visualizations, how on track they were. So, how are Canberra and Washington, D.C. alike? So both are in Australia? No. Both are in the United States? No. One is in Australia and one's in the United States. Both are the largest cities in the world. No, they are not. They're big cities, but they're definitely not the largest cities in the world. Both are national capitals? Yes. Both are national capitals. Number 2, what is similar about the National Library of Australia and the Library of Congress? So the National Library of Australia and the Library of Congress. Both, so let's read and we'll find the best answer for this question. So both are important libraries with a lot of books. Yeah, that's true. Both make and settle laws for each country. Now, the Supreme Court and the High Court are different buildings. They're actually talking about 2 different buildings. So no, the libraries do not make and settle laws for each country. Both have copies of every American book. No, the American library has the American books. But the Australian library has Australian books. Both have copies of every American and Australian book. No, the American library has the American books, and the Australian library has the Australian books. So both are important libraries with a lot of books. That's our best answer for this question. Okay. Number 3, why do people visit the monuments in each capital? Why do they do it? To learn about the nation's laws? Let's just go up and look at here, because it says right in our passage, gives us as a hint. These monuments teach about the history of the country. Okay, so their monuments are there to teach you about important people or events of a country or an area. So people visit them not to learn about the laws, not to read the greatest books, to learn about the nation's history makes sense, because that's what it says, or to see their current leaders. No, history. Monuments are usually made for important people or events in a nation's history. Okay, so history again means something that happened in the past. So they're teaching about the past, not the present, not the future. They're teaching about things that shaped the country and made it what it is today. Okay, what is the main idea of the passage? The main idea, remember, it's called Australia and America's Great Capitals. So is the main idea Australia and the United States have nothing in common? I don't think so. They did say that there were some things in common. Canberra and Washington, D.C. have many similarities. I think that could be a good answer. Capitals everywhere are the same. No, they did not make that point. The United States has a better capital than Australia does. That's not what they were doing. They weren't comparing. They were just saying that they have many similarities. Okay, so they were saying what's the same and some things that are different, and they were pointing out that there's many things that are the same. Okay, so let's see if I can find some pictures of these buildings to see how your visualization went. I'm going to show you the Parliament House in Canberra, and it is shaped like a boomerang. So you can see it's got a curve there. So that's what they mean by shaped like a boomerang. Okay, and then we're going to go to, wrong one here. We're going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, so that's the Supreme Court in the U.S. And you see those columns there? You might have visualized the columns. And then we're going to move to the Australian High Court. It still has a column, Okay, it's a little bit of a different shape of a building, a different style. So this is kind of old-fashioned, grand, and this one is more modern and sleek. Then we have this is the US Library of Congress. So you can see the domed tower. So there's a dome on that tower. And then this last one is also columns, lots of windows, huge building. And now we have the one that's in Australia, the Australian Library, which also has columns. Again, they're a little different. So there's columns, there's a sculpture there, columns. So you might want to go look up some of the monuments in these cities. It's pretty cool to see. But those are your buildings that we were talking about. So those are some of the buildings that we were reading about. That's what they look like in real life. It's kind of cool. So maybe take some time to go and look up some neat buildings in Australia and Washington, D.C. I hope this was helpful. I hope that was helpful to you and gave you some pointers on your understanding of the reading today. Make sure you check back in tomorrow for another comprehension video. Have a great day.